Hush now, he told her, his voice low and unshakable, don't waste your breath arguing when you could be gasping my name instead. She froze, torn between the fear that had caged her for years and the promise that shimmered in his eyes. What happens when a broken woman collides with a cowboy who refuses to let her stay broken? You're about to find out. The prairie stretched wide beneath a dusky sky, painted in streaks of amber and violet, the kind of sky that made you believe in endless roads and second chances. Dust swirled around Clara's boots as she tightened the strap on her horse's saddle, her fingers quick and practiced, though her shoulders carried a weariness she could never shake. She worked silently, not because she had no voice, but because silence had long been her armor. Words had only ever earned her bruises and regrets, so she swallowed them whole until her chest ached with the weight of everything unsaid. Her horse shifted uneasily, a faint limp betraying him, and she crouched to check his leg with worried hands. The animal was her only true companion, a living, breathing creature that neither demanded nor judged. She whispered softly, "You're all right, boy. Just a stone, maybe," her voice barely rising above the wind. That was when the distant thunder of hooves broke into the quiet evening, a sound so commanding it drew her head up before she even thought to hide her nerves. The rider appeared against the horizon, framed by the dying sun, tall in the saddle, his silhouette cutting clean through the glow. When he drew close enough for her to see his face, her breath hitched. Jack Calder. Everyone in town knew him by name, cowboy, rancher, a man said to live by his own unbending code. He was neither cruel nor careless, but he wasn't one to cross. His presence filled the space around him like the prairie wind, strong, unrelenting, impossible to ignore. Jack's horse slowed as he pulled to a stop near her. His sharp gaze flicked from her face to the limping animal. He dismounted with the ease of a man born to the saddle, boots landing with a solid thud. His shadow fell across her as he crouched near the horse's leg without asking, his calloused fingers tracing carefully down to the hoof. Clara stiffened, instinct urging her to pull back, to shield herself from being corrected or ridiculed. "Your horse is limping," he said, his voice steady, low, a rumble that seemed to settle in her bones. "You ride him hard." The question stung like an accusation, though his tone wasn't sharp. Still, Clara bristled, her lips parting with the old reflex to defend herself. Nobody touched her horse without her say. Nobody questioned how she cared for him. But before she could unleash the argument lodged in her throat, Jack pried a pebble free from the hoof and let it fall into the dirt. He gave the animal a firm but gentle pat. "Not your fault," he muttered, more to the horse than to her. "Stone lodged in there. Happens to the best riders." Rising to his full height, he dusted his hands on his jeans and looked at her, eyes steady and sharp in the fading light. "Next time, check the hooves before you stall him. Easy fix, if you catch it sooner." The words could have been condescending, but they weren't. They were plain, direct, spoken with the weight of truth rather than insult. Still, Clara felt heat rise in her chest, a defensive fire she couldn't extinguish. She opened her mouth, ready to argue, ready to prove she wasn't careless, that she didn't need a man telling her how to care for her own. But his gaze pinned her in place, and before she could speak, his voice rolled through the air, calm yet commanding. "Hush now." The words wrapped around her like a rope, halting her protest mid-breath. His eyes held hers, and there was no cruelty in them, no smirk of superiority, only certainty, solid as stone. "Don't waste your breath arguing when you could be learning." Or, he paused, his gaze lingering with deliberate intent, heavy enough to make her pulse stumble, "when you could be gasping my name instead." Clara's breath caught sharp in her chest. The audacity of his words struck like lightning, but what unsettled her more was the tremor in her heart that didn't feel like fear. It felt like recognition. Something in him was dangerous, but not in the way she had always known danger. Jack Calder didn't threaten her body, he threatened her silence. She turned quickly, pretending to tighten the saddle straps again, anything to break the pull of his eyes. Her hands shook, though she told herself it was from the evening chill. She wanted to dismiss his words as arrogance, wanted to push them out of her mind, but they sank deep, as though he had spoken them not to her ears but to the part of her that still longed to feel alive. In the nights that followed, she replayed those words against her will. At the mercantile, where she stitched seams for a few coins, they echoed. When she returned to her small room above the barn, a space she paid for with hard-earned silence, they whispered in the quiet. She tried to bury them beneath routine, but every time her thoughts wandered, she heard that voice, low and unshakable, "Don't waste your breath arguing when you could be gasping my name instead." And then came the evening when her past caught up to her. Clara had finished late at the mercantile, her basket of mended clothes heavy on her arm. The streets of town had thinned, lanterns flickering as men spilled out of the saloon with rough laughter. She kept her head down, hoping to pass unnoticed. But she felt their eyes before she heard their steps, the same men who had haunted her once, men who looked at her like she was prey too stubborn to vanish. They cornered her in the alley behind the store, shadows swallowing her retreat. Her breath came shallow, fear clawing up her spine. She wanted to scream, to fight, but the old terror seized her voice, stealing every word she'd ever swallowed. And then, like thunder cutting through the storm, Jack Calder's voice split the night. Step back. 2 words, no shout, no anger, just iron. He emerged from the shadows, his presence filling the narrow alley, his hat brim casting his eyes into dark focus. The men faltered, their bravado withering under his steady advance. Jack didn't need to raise his fists. He didn't need to make threats. The weight of his gaze was enough to send them scattering into the dark. Silence returned, broken only by Clara's ragged breaths. She trembled, clutching the basket like a shield. Jack's eyes softened just a fraction as he looked at her. He didn't crowd her. He didn't demand gratitude. He simply extended his hand, palm open, steady as the earth beneath them. You don't have to live scared, he said quietly, the words carrying more power than a shout ever could. Not while I'm here. Her throat tightened. For so long, silence had been her only weapon, her only shield. But in that moment, standing in the safety of his shadow, she felt the faintest crack in her defenses. For the first time in years, she wanted to speak. For the first time, she wanted to believe someone meant what they said. She didn't take his hand, not yet. But she didn't turn away either. And for Clara, that was the beginning. Days blurred into weeks, the prairie shifting from brittle winter wind into the soft promise of spring. Clara found herself moving through those days with a rhythm she had not known in years, though she would not admit it aloud. Jack Calder was everywhere without being overbearing, his presence like the steady hum of the earth beneath her boots. She did not invite him close, but he seemed to know how to linger at the right distance, never too far when she needed him, never too near when she wasn't ready. At first, she told herself she wanted nothing of it. Men had been storms in her life, raging, consuming, leaving destruction in their wake. But Jack wasn't a storm. He was the sky after, endless and still, offering room to breathe. When her horse spooked at the rattle of a snake, it was Jack's calm voice and sure grip on the reins that steadied them both. When a windstorm tore the barn door from its hinges, it was Jack who appeared with hammer and nails, mending it without being asked, his movements efficient, his jaw set with quiet focus. He expected nothing in return, not even thanks. Yet Clara's guard was a fortress, and fortresses did not fall in a single day. Fear was stitched into her bones, a reflex she could not simply unlearn. One night, as the fire in the ranch house cracked low and shadows curled along the walls, the weight of it spilled out of her. She sat rigid in the old chair by the hearth, hands clutched tight in her lap, while Jack leaned across from her, elbows on his knees, watching her with that patient steadiness that unsettled her more than cruelty ever had. "You don't know me," she said, the words sharp from years of being buried. Her voice quivered, but she forced it through. "You don't know what's been done to me, and you don't want to. People always say they'll stay, but they don't. They leave. They always leave." Her confession hung heavy in the air, her breath unsteady in the silence that followed. She braced herself for dismissal, for denial, for some careless promise meant to soothe. But Jack didn't flinch. He leaned forward, his face lit by the fire's glow, and spoke with a certainty that anchored her storm. "You're right," he said simply. "I don't know all of it. Don't need to. What I do know is this, whatever hell you've walked through, you walked out alive. That makes you stronger than anyone who ever tried to break you. And I don't leave, Clara. Not unless you shove me out." His words cut deeper than cruelty ever had. Cruelty she knew how to deflect. But honesty, steady and unshaken, threatened the silence she'd built her life upon. She looked at him for a long moment, searching for the lie, for the flaw, for the empty promise. There wasn't one. His gaze did not waver, his shoulders did not shift. He was immovable. Something in her cracked that night. Not a collapse, but a slow release, like the thawing of ice under spring sun. She let her body lean, just slightly, into the safety of his nearness. He didn't grab, didn't pull her closer. He simply allowed her weight against his shoulder, solid and steady, as though her trembling didn't scare him. For the first time in years, Clara let herself breathe in the warmth of another without fear of what it might cost. But Jack was not a man made for half measures. He had given her space when she needed it, but when she finally let herself step into his arms, he gave her everything. What began as safety became something more, something fierce, something that seared away the shadows that clung to her. The first time his lips touched hers, it wasn't to claim or demand. It was a vow, unspoken but unmistakable, that she was not broken, that she was not less, that she deserved to feel alive again. Clara resisted at first. Old reflexes rose sharp as thorns. She argued with him over small things, her defenses flaring like sparks from dry kindling. But each time, Jack's hand would tilt her chin, his voice low but commanding, not cruel. "Hush now," he would say, steady as always. "Don't waste your breath on fear. Don't waste it on doubt. Save it for calling my name when you remember what it means to live." It wasn't a demand, it was permission. Permission to release the endless fight inside her, to let go of the need to justify her every step, every breath. And slowly, she began to. Their nights shifted. Where once she curled in solitude on the small bed in her room above the barn, she now found herself curled in the circle of his arms, the steady rise and fall of his chest a rhythm more comforting than silence had ever been. She learned the sound of his laugh, rare but rich, a sound that warmed her more than the hearth fire. She learned the weight of his hand on her back, firm enough to ground her, gentle enough to never cage her. Spring painted the prairie in wildflowers, the land alive again after the long winter. Clara walked with her head a little higher, her shoulders no longer bent beneath invisible weight. The townsfolk noticed, though they said little, only exchanged knowing glances when Jack Calder's horse was often seen tied near the mercantile, or when Clara's smile lingered a heartbeat longer than before. But the greatest change was not in how others saw her. It was in how she began to see herself. No longer a shadow, no longer a voice swallowed by fear, she was present, visible, a woman whose words mattered. Jack had not rescued her. He had reminded her that she'd always been capable of rescuing herself. The final night of the season came with lanterns strung across the ranch yard, music spilling from fiddles and banjos as neighbors gathered for the spring dance. Clara stood at the edge of the crowd, nerves fluttering in her chest. She had never liked gatherings, too many eyes, too many chances to be judged. But when Jack's hand found hers, warm and sure, her fear eased. He led her onto the dance floor, his step steady, his hold unyielding. As they turned beneath the lantern glow, she lifted her gaze to his. He looked down at her with the same certainty that had unsettled her on that first night by the barn, but now she understood it. He wasn't here to cage her, he was here to remind her she could soar. Her breath caught, not in fear this time, but in realization. She had wasted too much of her life swallowing her words, holding her breath. Not tonight, not with him. She leaned closer, her lips brushing his ear, her voice soft but sure. "I don't want to waste my breath anymore," she whispered. "Not when I could be saying your name." Jack's smile was slow, spreading across his face like dawn breaking after the darkest night. His arms tightened around her, not possessive, but certain. She belonged not because he held her, but because she chose to stand there in his embrace. And under the stars, Clara gasped his name like a prayer, not because he ordered her to, but because at last, she believed she was free enough to.